ahead, Takura.
Thank you, Chair. My chair has been quite succinct in her brief on our organization, so I won't delve much into that. What I would like to do briefly is give a contextual overview of the anti-immigrant sentiments and the support organizations in Northern Ireland purporting to support these afflicted groups. So for context, I moved to Northern Ireland in 2001. 12,000 jobs were about to be lost at Bombardier, and the Labour government was going to lose. Those jobs were saved. However, today in 2024, organizations like ACSONI are supporting refugees and asylum seekers from Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, the Horn of Africa, and many other countries of which our government is involved either directly or indirectly. Okay? This is the context in which I want to talk about anti-immigrant sentiment in this country. The linkage between sectarianism and racism highlighted by Judge Marion when the Racial Equality Strategy of 2015 to 25 was launched. This is still vehemently denied by law enforcement and a significant amount of political figureheads and their parties. Messaging is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, practice on the ground is divergent from that. We know that because we operate within the third sector. Organizations across Northern Ireland who do not have the cultural competency nor trauma-informed approach are recipients to funding to support communities they do not have the know-how, lived experience, nor the desire to service. Institutional racism is ubiquitous in the third sector. Organizations are being funded off the suffering of individuals, families, and communities that suffer beyond the puff pieces and the photo opportunities. We must avoid hubris and begin to scrutinize our protectionist practices. That is the context within which I would like us, hopefully, to explore these issues. Because we and other organizations that I'm sitting with here and beyond, we are struggling to support our people, your people, because we all live in this country. We are struggling and we are not getting the support. Sadly, there are organizations here because they have historical linkages with institutions, funding institutions. They will get the funding to have, as Paula mentioned, to have events, cross-community events and so on, which are all very nice, fair and dandy, but what is the output after those events? I'll give you an example. Open Botanic is an event which has been held for 2 years in a row. My organization attended and had a stall there last year. What was the result of having that stall there? We didn't have any new walk-ins because of that. We didn't create, or no new organizations approached us to create partnerships or collaborations to support our community. However, that one-day event costs almost 40,000. Our organization, when we are applying for money to fund key support workers who have the cultural competence to deal with people from all over these countries I spoke about, who don't have translators, the mental health, well-being practitioners in this country, many of them aren't even interested in assisting these individuals, even before we deal with the cultural and linguistic barriers that they have to deal with to get the kind of services that they require. These are traumatized individuals. And so I'm saying that to say, what benefit is an open botanic event, which is a cultural event, which costs 40,000 to host, of which, to be honest with you, I will be quite frank with you because it is time for us to be frank with each other as fellow human beings. It's a wonderful piece to put in the press that yes, all these organizations who are here to support these poor people, unfortunate people, have gathered and had this lovely event. But most people from these communities are either, because of reasons mentioned by my colleagues, stuck in their houses. They're not coming out anyway unless they have to go to work or send their kids to school because they don't feel welcome. They don't. So spending 40,000 on an open botanic event is really spending 40,000 on yourselves. It's not for us. It's making yourself feel good for doing something which actually has no outcome for the community that you're being funded to service. And I'm saying this to say this is ubiquitous in the third sector. So many organizations are being funded to support Islamic people, to black people, Asian people, whatever it is, put whatever label it is you want to put on it. These organizations have linkages here in Northern Ireland, so they will get the funding. Organizations like the organizations here sitting in front of you, when we put in applications, we are scrutinized, we are derided, and it's almost like an audit, putting in an application. And then when you do finally get an answer, it's usually what you're doing for the community isn't enough. But if we were to put up an application for 40 grand to have a one-day event, I can just about guess what the answer is going to be to that as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious I haven't got around to everybody else, and I think we could talk about. I just wanted to pick up on the issue there around the issue of paramilitarism, racism, sectarianism, and we see it most acutely in South Belfast, and I know a lot of you are based there as well. And it's really just this issue, and I've been in meetings with a lot of you over the years around the underreporting, the lack of confidence in the police, the lack of feedback in terms of what's happening with your case, and I just wanted to know, are you feeling reassured that this horrendous summer we've had will bring about changes in terms of how you are respected, engaged with, and that the perpetrators will be dealt with?
Not really.
Not really? Okay.
No. We want to see the action, not the words.
Okay.
We've heard enough words, but we always hear enough words, beautiful words, lovely words, but they are just words. And when other communities in this country, well, they don't face similar issues, but historically have faced similar issues in terms of discrimination or sectarianism. When they cry, they are heard, and they're not given announcements and pretty words. Action takes place. Today, you have funding, Peace Plus funding, which looks at both these communities to make sure their needs are met. Those are not words, those are actions. When things happen in those communities which should not happen, institutions rally round, whether it be housing executive, PSNI, the legislature itself, they make sure that this is a problem. Let's address it. However, when it comes to issues like Islamophobia, racism, racist bullying in schools, leave it up to the headmaster in that school to decide how he's going to. It's not a policy. But if that happened to a certain member from another community in this country, we now have integrated schools simply because those issues I'm talking about were taken on board. If something happened to one of them, there would be action, not words. So, sorry to ramble there, but the answer is no, we're not reassured.
Anybody else want to respond before I move on?
Just very quickly as well,
yes.
During the riots, we had people who were approaching their local paramilitary leader and asking if they're going to be safe. So, we're not past that yet.
No, I know. I was dealing with a family got put out. Yeah, the police said we have to speak to community leaders. I mean, it is disgusting. Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, Chair, may I add? I think there's a clear distinction in what we're talking about. Is if you look at, unfortunately, what happened in Southport, the whole country went into complete disarray. We have incidents, for example, like the Ian Huntley case and what happened to those two young ladies. And then we have other such incidences where there has been this type of, really disproportionate response.
The Bulger boy, was it? Bulger?
There's another young teenagers who decided to put a young turtle on the railway tracks, etc. But there wasn't a massive outpour and outcry of this nature. But as soon as it's somebody of color, all of a sudden they're a refugee or an asylum seeker. There has to be a negative connotation associated with color.
And the murder is suddenly more significant because it's committed by a person of color. Is murder just not murder?
Okay, Deputy Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming in. That was some really hard-hitting, significant stuff, but very important. And I think just when you're talking about what happened in Southport, I think something that really sat with me was how painful it must be for those families that the focus was not on the loss and the tragic loss of 3 little girls, but instead it turned to people destroying their own communities, turning on people, businesses and other families within their communities. I think that was the worst way across the country we could have possibly reacted to that atrocity. And the riots and the damage and attacks we saw in Belfast were obviously following on from that. And you've outlined some horrendous things that have happened, how your community hasn't felt safe, and it's so disappointing. And I am truly sorry as an elected rep for this place that was happening in Belfast. So it came out yesterday that there was nurses from Northern Ireland who'd been intimidated out of their house and moved to live in disused hospital accommodation with their children. Just so inappropriate for nurses who are working in our health service, are moved to such inappropriate accommodation with their children for months on end. And I think that really, I'd like you to speak wider to the support you feel you receive following those attacks from agencies such as the Housing Executive and the police. And I'd like to hear a bit more about how you feel and what could be improved there.
The question was about how the Northern Ireland Housing Executive supports or not supports ethnic minorities, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. I would have experience in this area in my personal life as well as in my professional life. So if you don't mind, I will give you both examples. Before I do, we need to accept that our institutions are institutionally racist. Before we proceed, we need to understand that, okay? And if our institutions are institutionally racist, that supports racist behaviors from individuals that are working for those institutions. So if we can understand that, we may well understand the examples I am about to give you. So the first example is there were 2 families in Mid-Antrim who came here on certificate of sponsorship visas, okay? Certificate of sponsorship visas are promoted by the government of this country during the COVID pandemic to support the NHS. Now, for somebody to get on a plane and come here on a certificate of sponsorship visa, they've paid exorbitant amounts of money to come here to serve your sick and infirm. That's number 1. Number 2, when these incidents happened to these individuals, when they contacted the Northern Ireland Housing Executive because they were on private rentals for support in a crisis, they were told the Housing Executive does not support them. That has no mechanisms in place to support them. However, the Home Office confirmed that those individuals that come to this country on certificate of sponsorship visas, which were extended by the invitations extended by the government of this country, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive has an obligation to those people. So this is why I began by saying, if an institution is already institutionally racist, it can only support the individual. I will elaborate. Some of you may know that in around April, May this year, in Finnegy, where I used to live, anti-immigrant posters went up, and in my obviously they went up in front of my house, so personally I had a stake in the issue, but also as a community worker, I also had a stake in that, in speaking out against it, and as a father as well, because my children will see that signage. So having spoken out, certain people were not happy about that, and they painted over my house and intimidated me. Believe me, my experience in Northern Ireland, somebody painting on my house does not scare me. I've been through worse, much worse. Just giving you context. However, I was contacted by an individual in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive the day after the incident. And this was his question. Remember, this is somebody whose family has just been traumatized. At least my kids were traumatized. I wasn't, to be honest with you. I've been through worse. But the first question this individual asked me was, so are you moving out? So my question to him was, have you found me somewhere to go? Because I was on the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. By the way, the accommodation I was in, since before COVID, just at the start of COVID actually, 2019 December, it was emergency accommodation, right? I'd been stuck in there for 4 years with my 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. First question he asked me, are you moving out? I said, well, have you found me an alternative place? Then he said, no. Then I said, so I'm not going anywhere. To which he dropped the phone, called me back about 2 hours later and said, the landlord wants you out by 5 o'clock. Okay? Remember this happened to me and my kids the day before. Now I'm being told the landlord wants you out by 5 o'clock. I asked why? What have I done to the landlord? He said, because you're bringing too much attention to his property and it's going to rise his insurance. So I said, well, my kids are still at school and I don't have 600 or 700 pounds lying around for me to just suddenly go and find a new place to go. So, I'm not going anywhere. So for the next 3 to 4 days, I actually attended a meeting with Paula where this individual phoned me during that meeting, right? Forgot to mention. He found me a house in the village. In front of the house that I was supposed to move in after being intimidated in Finnegie, there was the same sign. Instead of saying landlords in Finnegie, it said landlords in the village. That's where this individual in the housing executive thought it was appropriate to move me during a time of crisis. So, again, I go back to the issue that I spoke about earlier, about cultural competency, okay? And having individuals with the know-how to do their job, trauma-informed approach. I was listening to some of the deliberations in the hearing before this, okay, reconciliation, etc., etc. Those individuals receive a trauma-informed approach, do they not? So, because you're brown, can you not be approached with a trauma-informed approach? Because in most cases we are not. When the PSNI comes to take your statement after your windows have just been kicked in, they're not sensitive to the fact that culturally, linguistically, you may be on a different spectrum from them. All they want to do is just get their job done. So here, you contact the hate crime advocacy agent. This is their number. This is how the police deal with you here. Now, I understand historically there's a reason for that, because the police themselves and their engagements with the local community have been very tense. This is only part of the UK where you have Land Rovers with all kinds of armor on them and all. So I understand that. However, as things change, you also upgrade your information, you upgrade your training, you upgrade your competency. There doesn't seem to be a desire in this country to do that for certain sections of our community, of which it's a very small, very tiny, in terms of statistics, 135,000 ethnic minorities, whether it be, this is from the last census, and many of those are not working because they're children, many of them are elderly, but they're taking all the houses and they're taking all the jobs from 2 million Irish people. My issue with the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, my organization's issue, is one which is very, very concerning, because it's not only an institution that is institutionally racist, but they have individuals in that organization that are racist and carrying out those jobs to support people when they are not supporting people. So they denied that they were able to help those 2 families in Antrim, and the Home Office actually had a different story. So we need clarification from these institutions as well, because many of these institutions, when you walk into them, they have all kinds of flowery statements about inclusion, diversity, and equity, and how their policies are adhering to this. But on the ground, their staff don't know those policies or practice those policies. And so people suffer because of this.
Harry, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you so very much. Just one question. Prior to the summer of 2024, did you feel like you were a full integrated part of society, and did you feel like before all this that you were able to live without fear? The simple answer would be no. These things have been there for years, and as I said before, and it's the third time I'm saying exactly the same thing, that the things which a normal person would consider racist here, we might not consider it as a racist because we are immune to it. We think that's all right. I'm not going to make a fuss out of all these things. But yes, during that summer 2024, we have seen a different face of Northern Ireland. Yes, having said that, I would like to appreciate the people who came out in the solidarity as well. That was a big slap on some of these far from rights. So that is the only positive one I see. No, I've asked some other platforms the questions to these very people who are after or maybe are always responsible of these things. Like we had our centre burned twice. Like first time nearly burned to the ground, and the second time when we had it all repaired, done, we were given the keys on Wednesday. Friday evening, burnt again. And my question to those people was, is it helping Northern Ireland? If this is your own house, this is your own home, you're burning your own home, you're in the news again. I mean, the news of the BMCA building being burned, it was worldwide. It was in Washington Post. It was from very far east, from the countries where I hardly hear from, like Israel, Middle East, Far East. It was all over the media. And I'm thinking, is it helping the local economy? Is it helping your tourism? Is it helping the businesses? Is it helping your foreign investment we are begging for? No, it's not. So the clear answer and the short answer is no, but the things got worse over this summer period.
Short answer, no. And the reason why is because people feel entitled to treat you a certain way because you are different. And the reason why people feel entitled to do that is because of the messaging that comes from their politicians and from their leaders and from the heads of government. So I would like you, Harry, to imagine if you were catching a train from Finnegy into Belfast. It's like less than 10 minutes. But imagine if when you're on that train, a group of 5 young people, probably between 15 and 16, the 15 and 18. I'm a middle-aged man. What am I going to do with 5 strong, virile young men deciding to attack me just because I'm sitting there quietly being black? You know? So the security people on the train feel it's none of my business that this guy is getting attacked. And that's because society tells him that it's not his business. And those kids attack people like me and these ladies and my brother because they feel entitled, because society tells them it's okay to attack them, because if you attack them, you won't get arrested. You won't even get a fine. There will be no repercussion. So we don't feel safe, we feel aware. We always have to be aware. Always. Even if you're going into a takeaway. I was going to a takeaway shop a couple of weeks ago. And as I was walking in, this young man says to me, I had my hair tied up that day, which I do sometimes. And he says, "What's that, your hair?" And I was like, well, you've just answered yourself. Then he goes, "Why are you talking to me like that?" Now, I'm talking the way I'm talking now, and he was talking that way. But because he's entitled to talk to me that way, he feels, you should answer me properly. And this was a boy young enough to be my own son, okay? But they feel entitled enough to speak to us and treat us that way. So no, we don't feel safe here. We feel aware, and we have to be aware, and we have to make our children aware. And if our parents visit us, we also have to make our parents aware that this is how it is, because people will watch you get abused, people will watch you get stoned, beaten, and they'll act like nothing is happening. It happened to me in 2006 on the Newton Ards Road, beaten in broad daylight on Christmas Eve in front of CCTV cameras. No convictions up to today, no arrest up to today. That was 2006. I told you, painting on my house, You're just decorating my house when you do that, because I've been through worse.
Brian, please. Thank you.
Look, thank you for your attendance today and for everything that you've presented to us. And some of you I've met previously. I did work actually for Ford South for a couple of years there, not so long ago. Certainly the events of this summer have been shocking for everyone, and how the killings in Southport were exploited by people with an agenda, to an anti-Muslim agenda and then an anti-immigrant agenda. And there's a wider context to that. It happened across the UK, it's happened down south, it's happened in Europe, so it's not just here. But we've never seen it so bad here. So it brought all that into focus. I do feel there's almost a battle. I've seen it before happening where there's allegations made about some incident, and people will falsely say it was a foreign national, it was somebody of coloured skin, and whether that's true or not, quite often it's not true, but it ends up with protests. So there's people who are looking at opportunities with a racist agenda, undoubtedly, to exploit things. So that battle is going on. So for people, I do listen to people. So for people who say, look, I'm not going to listen to your concerns, that's actually not helpful. It's important that I listen to everyone's concerns. I will weigh up what they're saying. I would say I will engage with you if you have concerns about housing. If you've other concerns that you want to raise, I will at least listen to those, but I will weigh them up. So we have seen this summer with the, if you call them anti-immigrant protests, and then the counter-protests, wider issues brought into it, which actually hasn't been helpful. So some of the counter-protests end up as anti-Israel protests, anti-Israel elements to it, by BDS, and that's actually not helping if you're going to have what essentially is anti-Semitism brought into a protest, So as I said, that's about other issues. If it's just meant to be a counter-protest.
Yeah,
well, you can see the example of this, where other political issues are being brought in, and that's another example of exploitation. But it is a problem we have. I often talk to groups. I mean, you only have to look at the census figures. Northern Ireland, 2001 to 2011, the number of people who were born outside the UK and Ireland living here doubled to 2001 to 2011, and doubled again to 2021. And the number of people, self-identification as their racial background is non-white, doubled and doubled again. So society is changing. Some people are struggling to cope with that change, and there has to be a challenge to that. But there also has to be an effort for that social integration of working together in society, that we are here as one society, but there's different elements to it. So I do put effort into that, but I don't dismiss. If people want to raise concerns, I will listen to them, but I will say to people, look, society, there is change happening. If you think you can live in a society, an area that's all white, that's not going to happen in the modern era. Vast majority of people who are coming here are working. If you look at, if you're in hospital, if you're in a care home, I don't want to stereotype, but particularly in those sectors, if you look around you at who's working, who's contributing to society, and proudly being here. So I just do see it as a struggle for the attitude setters, and it's important that the voice of inclusion and tolerance is strong, and those that want to promote intolerance, that there is a counterweight to that. So that's a struggle I see myself involved in. And in terms of funding, it's important not to make it about other issues, with respect about which groups get funding and so on. I mean that's down to applications, and it's important that all groups are supported. But as I say, to keep the focus on what the issue is about, trying to get society to work together and having that involvement, so that we can have that inclusion. But it's an issue for TEO, and it's the bigger issue now for our society. It's almost overtaken our own sectarian divide.
We want to go ahead, Laurie. Go ahead.
The only thing I would probably say, Brian, if you don't mind, is, it's if we could swap places, maybe you would better understand what it feels like to be me. Because it's very, very difficult. I will never presume to tell you how it is to be white. I would even if I could tell you stories that I assume wouldn't be relevant, it's not the case. And what we have is a lot of people with the will to do all the right things, which is wonderful. But the fundamental part is, let's have this conversation where you understand where I'm coming from, what you mean when you say what you say, and what I'm experiencing. Because the discrepancy systematically is because the system is broken because it looks at things through one lens, whereas it needs to look at things through a multiple lens. So if we're going to talk about health, let's try and get as many voices around the room so that if we're creating a policy, it's robust enough to cover everything as much as we can. And even if we do have some things missing, we can learn from the things that we miss and improve it as we go along. And I think that's what we're concerned about, that we've been going on for so long. And I completely respect that Northern Ireland has its own history. But we've now got other individuals from different backgrounds that are adding on top of what is your Good Friday Agreement. Personally, I think the Good Friday Agreement is an incomplete document, but that's a personal conversation. That's my own view. Because I think, to me, the Good Friday Agreement is the equivalent of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. It's the same aspiration, 2 different jurisdictions, and the whole aim is for a society that sees each other as equals, but makes room for each other equitably. And I think that's what we're asking for. And I appreciate all of you having to sit in this room and listen to what we have to say. It's an uncomfortable sit down, because it's hard for us to sit in front of you and tell you what we hear and experience and try to articulate that without wanting to offend you, but needing you to invite you into our space so that collectively we can find a way that Northern Ireland be the truest reflection of every single person in this place, because we're all ambassadors of Northern Ireland when we leave here. So it's how can I do that? And I look at you and know that I have your support. And where there's things we do not understand about each other, there is room to sit down and have a conversation and get to that resolution that says, here's the problem. Now, how do we fix that now that we found it? Because it's not about you personally. Society has been designed in such a way that it makes us enemies of each other. And both Northern Ireland and the majority of the people who live in this country, we're living off of the colonial past that has a divide and rule mentality. So we're still living in a system that's very colonially minded as opposed to being realistic to where we are today. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted, I take umbrage to something you said, Brian, when you said that funding is a different issue. We are talking about supporting people. We are talking about supporting people's lives, not only people who are being racially abused, but just support in general. So when we look at the government of Northern Ireland, it has a department for communities, right? For communities. It is funded to support those communities. So if communities that are marginalized are telling you that they are marginalized in terms of funding, and then you tell us that that's a separate issue, my brother, that's a bit concerning.
Another question, Brian? Is that you finished?
No,
that wasn't a question. I was just commenting.
No, you're commenting back. No, I'm just saying. Sometimes I'll hear groups arguing about other groups getting funding, and I'm just saying that's rather than identify certain groups and say why are they getting funding and why am I not. I don't think it's not necessarily fair on the other groups.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for coming along today. Certainly been very useful to hear your contributions firsthand. And on the day of the Stormont recall, I was very clear from the beginning. Condemn all racism, condemn all violence, condemn any type of murder, anything that's happened in this country. There should be no air given to it and no place given to it. But there's a couple of points I would like to pick up with you. And Naomi, you had mentioned the term legitimate concerns, and that was a term I did use when I was speaking in Stormont. So I want to, I suppose, grasp that because it was obviously in reference to myself.
Actually, just you. I was there at the chamber, but it wasn't just you. Well, it's been said in several statements by other people.
So I'm not going to duck that. People do have, in my term, I do believe legitimate concerns, but that doesn't take away any of the violence or any of the thuggery that went on is wrong. And that is so counterproductive to any concerns that anybody has in this society. So I don't want you to conflate them two issues. And labelling people as far right because they have concerns is wrong.
But labelled anyway.
No, I'm not saying, but I'm just in general, in this topic, since the summer, that's what people have been doing. If somebody has expressed some sort of a concern, oh, they're far right. And the Chief Police Commissioner from the Isle of Wight, I thought was very apt when she came out and she was talking about Southport, that you have to get to the root of the problem that's causing this to try and deal with it, to move on, and that's what we need to go with. And it's good to have this conversation today to open that space, because if you don't listen to a section in society, you know, it breeds this and breeds this, and then it comes to the boiling point that we have seen in the summer. And no way is that condemning any of the violence or any of the racist attacks that you have suffered, and I don't want to be associated with any of that, because it's not my nature and not me. But like Brian has mentioned, there's people that do come to us with concerns, and we have to work with them. I do have to take exception. You talk about institutional, you know, racism that exists, and you singled out the housing executive, and I think that was unfair that you let that go unchallenged. Because I don't, any of my dealings with the housing executive, I don't believe that's the case.
What's your ethnic origin, sir?
Well, you know, by...
No, I don't, sir. I'm asking you, what is your ethnic
I'm
origin?
35 years old, been born and bred in Gloryford in North Antrim. That's where I've come, and I'm not...
So you're Caucasian? That's what I'm asking. I'm asking a direct question, what your ethnic makeup is.
You know, when I sign the forms, I class myself as white British.
Okay, so you wouldn't have any of the experience of institutional racism that I'm mentioning because of your ethnic. So you cannot discount something you've never experienced simply because you can't experience it.
The people that come in through my office that I've been helping regarding right to leave, right to remain, all different requests. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what you singled out the housing executive. So it doesn't matter if it's yourself or somebody living in Cullybecky and Bandside. If there's no houses and they have to go in temporary accommodation, you know, that's a Northern Ireland wide search, and that person is placed. It could be anywhere in Northern Ireland. It could be in Enniskillen, it could be in Limavady, it could be Portrush, it could be in Belfast. And I think it's unfair picking up on the housing executive.
But I didn't single out the housing executive. I mentioned the PSNI, I mentioned the Home Office, I mentioned the housing executive when I was speaking in the context of institutional racism. So I did not single them out. There was a question which the chair directed, which was about the housing executive, and I answered to that within that context of housing executive. That's why when she asked the question, I spoke about it. But when I mentioned institutional racism earlier in my what do you call it? My opening remarks, I mentioned several institutions, sir.
So, in any of the institutions, something I haven't experienced, and I haven't experienced that.
Wouldn't, because you're white.
But like,
No, not only the
I
white,
work
you...
with.
Can I just challenge him in his lived experience? He's here to give testimony.
I'm not challenging.
You are.
Well, that's not my experience. So what?
Yes, it is.
There's different people come through.
Excuse me, sorry.
It's a statutory agency that's doing a dishonour just calling them out like that. There's many people live in the house or work in the housing executive.
Excuse me, I'm in the chair. I'd like you to stop. I just wanted to bring Naomi in, please. We are here, as Emma said, to hear about lived experience. It is us as scrutineers to possibly bring the housing executive in and put that accusation to them. But I am never going to challenge if somebody is individually coming here to give testimony. We will listen to them and then we will take it to the relevant authorities. That is the role of us as a scrutiny committee. Naomi, go ahead.